that 0 is 0. Likewise, D2 only cares when it's on, and 0, 1 are zeros. Notice this nice diagonal we have forming, just like we observed in some other cases, right? D3, same thing. Okay? And so that drives then the outputs that I care about with A sub 0, A sub 1. All right? And that's how I derive these equations, by noticing that pattern and expressing it in that way. From there, I'm able to create these specific K-maps, which, again, I care about the don't care bits. Sounds weird, doesn't it? But I care about the don't care bits in the K-maps because of what reason?
Groupings? Grouping?
Right. I might be able to create a 4-value set or 4-legged set, right? In this case here, all 4 corners. So I could do 1, 4. I could also do 1, 4, and a 1, or I could do a 4 and a 2, right? So I have that option here. In the case of D0, D1, D2, and D3, okay, being that pattern 1, 1, 1, I don't care, allows me to create a 4-input set that just grabs them all. So I have some efficiency there, right? 1 or 1 or 1 is going to create a V. So that's what's really useful about these particular maps. So I can create from here, I can go from here and say, well, A0, right? I care about A0 when? Only in really one case. Okay, so when I'm designing A0, I create the logic off of my K-map, which shows my 3-input set. But there's only one that I really care about, and that is D0. D0 has to be 0 or 1. In order for A sub 0 to fire. It needs to be a 0 or a 1.
A 0.
0. Right? And then that then drives one of their input to determine whether it's fired or not. Okay? And that's how you construct these maps. Does that help? A little bit? Yeah.
In the lower K-map, would you want to take that grouping of 4 with the don't care? Like, would that be worth
Did
it?
you catch on that?
Or would it be worth it to just take the 4?
Yeah, hard.
So when we talked about this, so that's a great refresher question. We talked about this, and generally we lean on not having I don't care bits, but if I can have higher states, that is, if I can have a 4-legged set and a 2-legged set, I would prefer that over a 4-legged and a 1-legged. Yeah.
Can you show us how you got the drawing for the A1 K-map? Like where the values came from, how you got the X right there and the 1, 1, 1's on that position?
So my A1 K-map, okay? I'm going to back up. Who thinks they can describe it? Who thinks that they understand how we went from the truth table there to those equations to the A1 K-map? And I'd probably just go right from the equation myself. Who wants to give that a try? Who thinks they can, yes?
I could kind of explain what I use, and I use the same thinking with the K-maps. You kind of look for groupings.
Yes.
So in the truth table, you look for places where one thing is true in all given situations. For example, you could look at, let's see.
The very last one?
What's that?
The very last one, number 4? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, where it says 1, 1, 1 for A1, A0, B?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you look for groups like that, and then you find ways to combine the functions, and then you go through the functions and see if you can find ways to simplify that using the math we learned. So it's kind of a 2-step process.
Yes, I tend to use a 2-step as well. I try to iterate on it because it's never just one pass.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't say never, but seldom is one pass.
Yeah.
Certainly with a multi-level circuit,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be one.
And I think some people are like really good with the math, and some people are really good at kind of like thinking it through. So you find which works best for you.
That's a good way to describe it. All right? Others? Yeah,
So I would think to just look where it is like not D0 and not D1, but I don't understand why there's an X. It's like it's
but you
not
don't understand why there's what?
an X.
An X.
Because like I understand all the bits marked are not D0, not D1. So why the X? Why don't we care about that?
So what is that upper corner? What does that represent? What values? I heard a soft voice.
Not D0.
Not anything.
Not all of them.
Well, there's only two in play in that one square, right? There's only two variables in play? Or is there more than two variables? Not D3 and not D0 is because D0 are these two columns, not D0 are these two columns. So not D0 comes into play. Then going up there, we have D2 and D3. Well, it's not D3, so it's not D0 and not D3. What does our truth table say about not D0 and not D3? For A1. Where do you find not D0 and not D3 on the truth table? You don't. First line? Where there's zeros? Yeah. So there are always zeros on the top line. So what is my value for A1? Don't care. So that's why it's don't care. Other questions? Yeah.
For the lab 2, how are we supposed to drive the 12 inputs with the 2 hex keyboards?
For which one?
Lab 2?
For lab 2. Oh, we're switching to lab 2 question. Gonna need to be more specific. Go ahead.
There's only 4 outputs that we can make out by hexadecimal hexadecimal keyboard, but there's 6 inputs that we just want to do.
Exactly, just like we're counting bits, right? I have to have at least 4 bits to generate a unique number from the range of 0 to what? 0 to 15, which is 16, right? Unique positions. So if I need to generate the number 17, and I can only add bits in nibbles, how many bits do I need? Yes, I threw a term in there. Nibbles. Everybody remembers what a nibble is, right? All right, let's ask the fundamental question. What's a byte?
8 bits.
8 bits. I hear 8 bits. Do I hear any others? If 8 bits make a byte, what makes a nibble?
4 bits.
4 bits. Yes, that's a real term. All right. How many bits are in a bit? I heard a laughter. But it's part of your definitions, right? It's just like going back to your discrete mathematics class. How many of you love discrete mathematics? No, I won't ask that. But you all had discrete mathematics. And one of the things that they taught you is if you're going to define something, you have to first define the base case, right? And then you go from there. So in the case of our numbering schemes for binary bits, our base case is a bit. That's what we said, bit is a bit. We have nibbles, bytes, and more. Okay? So when I asked the question about how many nibbles do I need to add, what would you answer?
3.
I would answer 1 nibble, right? Because 1 more nibble will get me to the number 17. I have to have 2. I'm not going to use all 2. Just like we saw with our BCD encoder. Remember the BCD encoder? Great exam questions come from BCD encoders. Okay, do we have any don't care bits in BCD encoders?
Yes.
Yes. And you should be able to find them. Yeah.
So what you're saying is we're not only using just 2 hex keyboards, we're going to use maybe like half of something else.
Maybe. I gave you the tools. If you can generate something that generates 4 bits and you need to generate 8 or 10 or 9, you should be able to determine how many you need. Yeah.
Also for the same lab, you want to do a truth table for the 6-bit adder, but shouldn't that be like 2 to the 12 rows of stuff?
Maybe. You tell me. Yeah.
So how should we go about making a truth table for it? If it has that many rows for all the combinations?
Well, it has a fixed number of rows and columns based upon the geometry of how it was set up. I made it manageable. There were small enough numbers that you could build a truth table from it without going crazy. I know that's relatively speaking. Yeah, you should be able to, should be too many. Could be more for it, yeah. Yes? I thought I saw a hand, no? Other questions? Got them all, huh? Yes.
Actually, no, it's okay. It's out Wednesday, but no. Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Okay, then we'll get started on chapter 4 because chapter 4 is where you should. And I appreciate as many of you coming tonight as possible because I know some of you like to participate in the parties of All Hallows Eve and stuff, but we've got, what, a couple hours before they start, right? Or wait, we're science majors, we don't have a life, right? I know better, you have lives. Okay. So chapter 4, we're going to go into sequential circuits. We're going to break it up into 2 parts, just because it makes it easier to talk about the technologies in these 2 parts as sort of subunits. Okay, so that's kind of our order that we're going to attack this thing. So starting off with some definitions here, sequential circuits are outputs of combinational circuits whose operations depend solely upon the input. Don't they all? Well, there are some circuits that once you start them, they just keep going and going and going, like our clocks and stuff like that, right? But in the case of sequential circuits, what we're really focused on is a circuit here does some work and generates some output that a circuit here, or more accurately, I should say, a sub-circuit here generates some output. This sub-circuit then generates its output, that another sub-circuit uses, generates its output, and so on and so on. We connect these sub-circuits together, or circuits together, to create a bigger thing with. Okay, so the idea being is that we can make something much more sophisticated by creating a combination that is connected sequentially of circuits. Okay, that will cause it to do specific outputs. Okay, so what that really means is that, yeah, I've got these circuits that we've been studying, and we're going to introduce some new circuits too that do some very specific functions. And it's by taking and determining what outputs each of them can create, connecting them up in series, that's the sequence part, connecting them up in series, so to generate the proper kind of output that I need from this overall circuit. Okay? One of the things that's not obvious out of it, although your author really seems to think it is, but one of the things I don't think is very obvious about all this is that by creating these series of circuits that we're connecting sequentially like this, what we're really doing is creating memory inside the circuits, or between the circuits, if you will. Because what happens is that each of the circuits are going to be connected in the same machine, which means they all need to step through their function at some rate of time. Now, what we have to do is synchronize all of these circuits so that all of these circuits are operating in the same fraction of time that all of the other circuits in this system are. Which, when you look at, I don't think I have the slide up here, but when you look at some of these complex circuits with the multiple layers on it, oh, that's what was going to drop the study guide. When you look at some of these multiple layer circuits, and you see some have 2 layers, some have 3 layers, some have 4, some have 1, and you question yourself, well, how can they all operate within the same unit of time then? And that'll be part of the job, of course, of our computer engineers, electrical engineers' jobs to make that work. But that's why we're going to introduce some special keying components that we'll introduce here a little bit later in this chapter to enable that to happen. That's the important thing, though, is that each of these circuits, whether they're 1 layer or 4 layers or somewhere in between, all step in time, same fractional unit of time. What that does then is it creates this notion of memory at each of these time intervals. So somewhere, I think it's not set in all this, somewhere inside of this computer, inside of this master circuitry, there's this thing called a system clock. And it's this system clock that is operating at a specific known frequency, creating these intervals that all of the circuits operate upon at the same time, allows us to provide this synchronization along with these things that we're going to look at here later in the chapter. Okay, so keep in the back of your mind that we're connecting up these circuits together to create a larger capability, which means we have to synchronize all of them. So there's a clock involved with all of this, enabling us to do this. Okay, so we see that they have 3 characteristics, these sequential circuits, okay? In order for them to perform this way or create this thing that we call memory. First is that each device that we're going to put inside of this computing device must have 2 stable states. 2 stable states means that it could have unstable states, which really means if I have multiple layer circuits, we call those unstable between input and output. So as the circuits are switching between the different sub-layers within that one circuit, it's considered unstable at that point. It's not stable until that electrical pulse has gone through all of the circuits from input to its output, then it then becomes stable. So every circuit has 2 stable states. Additionally, each of these must be able to have some way of reading the state of that particular device, and I must have an ability to set the state at least once across all of these devices. This is what I was alluding to in the prior slide. I said that I need to be able to have the ability to take and synchronize all of my circuits at the same time. I need to have something built into these circuits to allow me to do that. So we have a couple of different ways we can approach this problem. So far, what we've been doing is looking at these acyclic type of circuits. That means that every circuit has unique inputs and generates a predictable output. And that output goes to something else. What we're going to see in this chapter is that that's not the way we're going to need all circuits to work. We need some circuits to work such that they have cycles within themselves. That is, some circuit components will actually feed their output as an input to some other components within the same circuit at the same level. Which means that I'm going to have which means I'm now going to need to start worrying about timing even more heavily than we have so far. Up to now, we've defined timing up in chapter 2. Didn't really talk about it too much in chapter 3. We did a little bit, but not much. But it's going to come heavily into play here in chapter 4. So we're concerned with timing because so far we've been looking at acyclic or acyclic circuits. We're now going to introduce cycles within them. Okay? The other thing, the other technique is that we're going to be creating circuits with memory in them using logic gates that we've already seen before. We're not necessarily creating anything new, although we will in toto, we just not individually. Okay, we're still going to sit with the same basic components. We're just going to wire them up differently. Okay? And then we're also, go ahead. So we're also going to introduce circuits whose output is then fed back into the input of the circuit itself, and that is how we do the circuit involved. So input state is a function of the inputs, I should say, the starting state of the circuit is a function of not only the inputs, but also the output from the prior state, the prior time of it. We'll take a look at that here in some subsequent slides. It doesn't sound too obvious right now, but when we see examples, it should become much more obvious. Okay, so let's go back to some components we already know. The simple NOR gate, right? I've got A, I've got B, they're both inputs, and I've got an output, single output. And of course, we know that the functional description of that particular gate is not A or B, right? So have fun. I mean, there's a couple different ways we can approach this. One we could say is, I'm trying to devise something that does something very specific, or I could just be a board student in a lab one night and say, hey, what happens if I take two of these things and I wire them up together, but I feed the output back into the input of one of these other NOR gates? Wouldn't that be fun? Let's see what happens, right? Hopefully it'll smoke, because we like it when things blow up, right? Yeah, I know what it's like in the labs. We like to see smoke. So let's see if we can do that. Well, this is what it would look like. This is what the result looked like. And it turned out it was not just crazy or mad or anything. It was actually fantastic. There's a lot of things we could do with this. Okay, so what this is doing is it's saying, okay, I've got two exclusive ORs, just like we talked about before. They both still have inputs, an input A, an input B, an input A, and an input B. Except this time, I want to take the input B and I want to take the input A, and instead of bringing something outside into this system, I want to cross-wire them or create a cycle so that the output of this gate, instead of going straight out only, now is fed back in as an input to the other gate. Likewise, take the output of that gate, feed it as the input to this gate here. Okay, and we have something kind of wild and crazy here that is actually really, really important. So we can create the ability to set and reset our Q values, our resultant values from this circuit, by cross-wiring XORs in this manner. Okay, and if you look at it, it's and again, it's like I was describing to you on last Wednesday, right? Where you really need to sit down with some paper and pencil or whiteboards and pens and walk through these things with numbers. You put a 1 up there, you put a 0 up here, or down here, sorry, that's up and that's down. I figured out up and down just over the weekend, so you have to bear with me here. So you put a 1 in up there, you put a 0 in down here, and what's your result? What happens to Q? I go 1 and 0. What happens to Q?
It should be 0.
It should go to 0, right? 1 goes down to 0. 0 also gets fed into here. I said I fed a 0 into here, which is driving this to a Q naught is 1. That's exactly what you expect. If Q is 0, Q naught had better be 1, right? So that still works. Yoo-hoo. It also meant that I just fed a 1 back into this, which is going to force this back down to 0, isn't it? So what I mean about this timing is now important to understand. Okay, so the instant that I apply a 1 here and a 0 here, what's really happening is these components, because they're already turned on, right? There's already power surging through those circuits, right? That means input was already provided here, input was provided here. And because these are always opposite values, right? If Q naught were a 1, this was a 1, that was feeding a 1 there, that was dropping that down to 0. So if my prior state was 0 and 1, and I applied a 1 and a 0 here, did I change anything? All right. Right? I had my R, I had my S, I have Q, I have Q naught. So, I just said that if Q naught had a 1 here, that means there's a 1 here. Well, let's do different colors. I'm sitting here holding different colors, so let me use one color for everything. Okay. So if I had a 1 here, that means there's a 1 here, that means there's a 1 here, that means there's a 0 here, right? That means this is a 0 and this is a 1, which is exactly what we thought it should be, right? They've got to at least be opposite. So if I applied a 1 here and a 0 here, does this change anything? Well, if I apply a 1 here, it's already got a 1. 1 or a 1 is still 0, right? 0 or 0 is still a 0 here, which generates a 1 here, right? So no change. So this thing's still sitting here thinking that it's nice and happy with the 1 and the 0 inputs here. It isn't until both erasing devices are way over here. This is unsafe. Okay. It isn't until I reverse these things. Wait a minute, that's not even reversing. I had a 1 here. I had a 1 here and I had a 0 here, right? What if I took away my 1? What if that's all I did was take away my R, my reset? No reset. No reset, no set. I'm just here. Did anything change? Did anything in this circuit change when I changed this input from 1 to 0? What changed? Oh, no, right? This is a NOR gate, right? It still has a 1 sitting here, right? I took away one of the two 1s, it's not going to change. I didn't change this, so this isn't going to change. The output of this isn't going to change, so therefore that input's not going to change. That input's not going to change. This circuit's still going to put out a 0 and a 1. This is that memory thing we were just talking about, right? So now I've got 0, 0 sitting here. Bless you.
Thank you.
So now what happens if I choose to set this circuit by applying a 1 here? Does anything change? Heard a quiet voice way over there.
Yes.
Yes, well, let's see what happens, right? I had a 0, 0 into this XOR before, right? But now I have a 1 coming in, and it's an OR, at least an OR, right? So that 1's going to change its output from a 1 to a 0. This goes to 0, which drives this to 0, which drives this to 0. All right, I'm going to step down. Which drives this to 0, which forces this to 1, which forces this to 1. Of course, that changes to 1, that changes to 1, and that doesn't change anything. Right? So notice it rippled through the circuits, but it did exactly what we wanted it to do. We set Q by setting this bit. The system remembered this change in values, and now it's holding it. What happens if I take away S? By taking away S, of course, I'm holding the eraser. But taking away S really means I'm setting it to 0. If I set that to 0, is there any change here? No. Is there any change here? No. It's still 0, right? 0 out here, 0 out there. Change here? No. Change here? No, I didn't change that. Change here? No. Change here? No. Change here? No. Change there. So it stays the same. I took away the set bit. The system holds those values. It has memory. See that? So if I asked you to explain how a cross-connected XOR can have memory, you can describe it. Right? Excellent. Okay, and likewise, now if I just go here and I say, okay, I set it, but now I want to reset it, right? To reset it, I change this bit to 1, that stays 0. What happens? Does anything happen as the output? It's an XOR input, so 1's going to go to 0 out. 0 out means that goes to 0. That means this goes to 0. That didn't change, so this now goes to 1. This now goes to 1. So this went to 0. That's 1. This is 1. This is 1. 2 1s together still put out a 0. Ultimately a 0. There we are. I take away the reset bit, change it from 1 to 0. Oops, that's supposed to be green. Change that from a 1 to a 0. Does that change my output?
No.
No, because that's still a 1, right? This doesn't change here. This didn't change here. So this stays a 1 here. The system remembers what it was set to. So I can change the state of Q, Q naught. I could change it to be 0, 1 or 1, 0. I could take away my inputs and these will stay. Right? Convinced yourselves of that? Could you convince me of that next Monday? Sure you can. And I might expect you to do that.
So
Even
you
though it's
take
not
away the
listed yet.
inputs and you don't change the what?
What's that?
If you take away the inputs, you don't change the results?
I didn't change the outputs. It does not change the outputs at all. Right? Because it has memory. That is our definition of memory here in circuits. Means I take away my inputs, the system remembers its outputs. Now, when we start talking about other sequential, more sophisticated sequential circuits, I might redefine that memory definition a little bit further, but this is one definition of memory. Okay? Make sense? Yeah.
So more specifically, it has that memory because it's still using the old information as two of its inputs.
But it's current.
It's current, but it's been updated by new information, but it's still using the old information there. So it's
It's using the most recent information.
So that's the most important part of this is reuse so that,
Exactly. It's not reuse. Because if you were, what we didn't do in here, but you would do in the simulation system, is you would be looking at R and an S, right? Over time, what happens when I set S, but R is held low? What happens when I set R and release it? And you still see that Q as an output is still high, right? Or low, excuse me. Even though I dropped it back down. So even though I'm still progressing in time, the most recent pulse set the value of Q, or Q naught. It doesn't have to hold that pulse. It just has to set it. Right? So this is the fundamentals, and we're going to build upon this heavily now in chapter 4. Okay? Because we're going to build some pretty advanced circuits using this kind of technology. By the way, I didn't mention it up front, but you've been staring at the title. It's important to point out that we do have a term for this type of circuit, and that's our SR latch. Okay? And now you can see how it works. We have two inputs, S and R. And what this circuit is doing is it's latching on to the last set value as its output. It has memory, S and R latch. S and R stands for set reset, which is where this turns. All right, so we just talked through all this, right? I'm gonna have to flap my gums on it. We just talked about this. So, that's an introduction then to our sequential circuits. We just haven't just taken a look at the S and R latch. What we're really talking about here with these circuits is that I've got my combinational logic, inputs and outputs, yes, but these circuits are going to be designed such that I care about what state they're currently in, and I care about the next state that they're going into, okay? In between those state transitions is where memory happens. That's where the storage is said to exist. Okay, so we're going to be very concerned, I'll just emphasize this one last time, we're going to be concerned with present state and next state. Okay? Because we know what the present state is, and we need to be able to predict the next state. All right, so we have these definitions. Next state is some functions, inputs is state, output function based upon Mealy function definition, outputs are G function of inputs and state, and all of these definitions are definitions. Okay. So types of sequential storage, we have synchronous and asynchronous. Okay, and it really depends upon when we need to observe their inputs and what time we're looking at those output changes to occur. Okay, for the cases of synchronous sequential circuits, what we're talking about is those circuits that have discrete definitions at specific time intervals. Okay, a T sub 0, T sub 1, T sub 2, T sub 3, at those discrete intervals, those circuits have specific behaviors that have been defined. Okay, those are said to be synchronous. Storage elements occur at those time intervals, and only at those time intervals. Those synchronous events are managed by the system clock. So the system clock tells us it's at T sub 0, T sub 1, T sub 2, and so on. The other type of sequential circuits are those that are said to be asynchronous. That is, given any input values, okay, is going to generate some results. By the way, one of those input values could be the clock, or not, okay? They could use it, that's fine. It's going to eventually generate some result. but its results are not predictable at these synchronized timed events at discrete time intervals. Okay, so it makes it very difficult to do logic design with those kinds of circuits. They do have very specific instances when I need that kind of circuit, but we're going to be focused mostly on the synchronous types because those are by far and large the most frequent or most ubiquitous types of circuits that we would work with. Okay, so most of them fall in this category, but you do need to be aware that there are some complex circuits out there that are asynchronous in nature. Okay, and so when it's appropriate, you would look at those kinds of circuits and consider them for those specific cases where that circuit is needed. But most of them will be discrete. All the ones we're going to look at are discrete. Okay, just needed you to understand that not all of them are. The asynchronous ones are hard. Okay? So let's stick to something easy, the discrete ones, right? So, in order to understand our discrete circuits, we need to understand simulation, how to simulate these circuits using discrete time intervals, which means we're using these evenly timed events. T sub 0, T sub 1, T sub 2. And here's the important thing about those time intervals, is that T sub 0, T sub 1, T sub 2, T sub 3. These are all equidistant in time. Okay? So if I said T1 minus T0 equals delta T, or delta T, then I would also say that T2 minus T1 are equal to T1 minus T0, which is equal to delta T. Okay, so that would be how I would and of course I would just continue this on for all of my time intervals. That is, all of my delta T's, all my time intervals between each of these discrete time events are equidistant from each other. All right, so time is going to be happening precisely, or I should say, it's going to be incrementing precisely at the exact same time for every one of these time increments. Okay? Otherwise, none of this is going to work. This is a very fundamental definition to a discrete event simulation. And so we're using discrete event simulations just to help us design these circuits, recognizing that in a discrete computer, which is what we're all using these days, that's how it operates. It has a clock that's operating, and all of the circuits are stepping through time in the exact same time intervals, the same delta T's. We're going to use a simulation to help us design this discrete events engine. Okay? So we're going to use this discrete simulation to help us design our combinational circuits, our sequential circuits. Okay? And so the other thing that we're going to take into account too, and this is where it gets a little bit dicey, is that we're going to assume that all circuits are perfect, right? And they all have the same fixed delay. Okay, so right there, those of you who understand things like chemistry, biology, even physics, understands that no two things are exactly the same. So there's always these slight differences, right? So we're not going to worry about that in this class here. We'll let our good friends over at the CE department and EE department worry about those things, okay? For now, we're just going to be content with the knowledge that they can make each of them close enough to being exactly the same, that all of this simulation stuff is going to work. All right, so that's an important input consideration when we're starting to think about setting up our design as well. Okay, the other thing that we need to consider here is that the change in input value, the change in our input values are going to then cause the circuit to performance operations on those inputs and generate its change in the output values. Sounds trivial to explain, but if I don't define all the rules up front and then we start designing circuits and it doesn't meet all the rules, then we can't say, oh, wait, that's not following the rules of the discrete width simulation. So it may sound obvious, but we're still stating them, that way we can hold them to it. Okay, the other thing, third condition is that changes in output values are then scheduled for some fixed delay based upon that input change so that we can then read it at that next time interval. This is all talking about balancing how much time the circuit needs to respond to the input to generate that output so that T sub 2 or T sub 3, I can then read that value and it's correct for that gate. The time for scheduled output change, the output values change along with any inputs. It means that cyclic type of thing has to propagate all the way through the circuit. The last bullet there says, is that, yeah, I generated this input and it forced this output, but the circuit's not done at that point, right? Because this output has to ripple through the other gate to make sure that that output is correct for all those given inputs in no one cycle. That's what that last bullet there was saying. Okay? Makes sense? Any questions? Good. Okay. Then let's take a look at a different kind of gate. Let's take a look at our NAND gate. Okay, now in this definition here, we have this NAND gate. It has two inputs, A and B. It generates the opposite output based upon what you normally think of it as an AND gate we do. And then I created this function that is containing this NAND gate. And this function, even though we say it is instantaneous, actually has a 0.5 nanosecond delay just built into the time it takes for electrons to move through that wire, or more correctly, bump into each other until that final bump gets down to the end of the wire, right? So assume, in this setup example here, that both A and B, the two inputs, have been 1. And they've been 1 for a long time, meaning longer than whatever time interval our delta t is for our circuits, okay? Okay, so that's sort of our setup, our initial condition. They've both been 1 long enough that, a 1 and a 1 on an input is going to drive by F to be what? A and B are 1. F is,
0.
hurry over here.
0.
0, right? 1 and 1 would normally be 1, but this is an and, so it'll be 0, right? So F is said to be 0. Okay, so that's our stable condition. That's our going in. It's had lots of time to sit there and stabilize and get the right answer of 0. Okay? But then we say at time 0, I guess this other time was pre-0 or something smaller than 0, A changes to 0. And at time 0.8 nanoseconds, it changes back to 1. There's our setup right there. Here's our definitions, A and B. F, well, since it's instantaneous, still has this delay of 0.5 nanoseconds. Okay? So what's happening here? This setup that we just created here, without looking at all the stuff below it, saying time t0, A is set to 0, at time t equals 0.8 nanoseconds, back to 1. What is going on here? What is this problem asking us to consider? Two things, maybe three. Yes.
The delay of this input to the output, and then A changing at a certain time.
Yeah, and I'm concerned with the output at smaller intervals of time, right? Specifically, I'm worried about if this takes 0.5 nanoseconds to change, I need to be sampling it at 0.5 nanosecond intervals, right? Otherwise, I may miss some important information. So that's what it's telling me. Okay, so let's take a look, before we look at a trace of this, let's take a look at what's happening here from this function notation, okay? At time in negative infinity, that's that smaller than zero thing I was talking about, right? So all the way up until time zero, I had my inputs of A and B, 1 and 1, which said that the inputs in F was 0 and F was 1, okay? That was our going in initialization condition. But then at time equals 0, okay, time is now at 0, I changed A to 0, B still stayed to 1. What happened? F instantaneously went from 0 to 1, but to propagate through 0.5 nanoseconds, okay, it changes to 0 because at here, my 0.5 nanoseconds, A is now sitting at 0, B is sitting at 1, F of input is now 1, but what happened here? 0 is going to go to 1 because F is going to change to 1 after a 0.5 nanosecond delay. What in the world is that? What's going on there? I said up here, times 0, I'm just fine. Everybody's happy, although I took away A, F of I, my instantaneous F, right, immediately went to a 1 because it took away one of the legs, but F still stayed at 0, right, because I got that 0.5 nanosecond delay. So 0.5 nanoseconds later, it's still 0, 1 inputs. It's still 1 on my instantaneous output. But my 5.5 nanosecond delay kicked in, and so that 0 output of the whole circuit then changed from 0 to 1. That's what this is saying. It's saying you're now looking at the whole circuit, even though I'm looking microscopically at it, right? I'm looking at the immediate output of the NAND, and I'm looking at the output of F. Then the next thing that happens is at 0.8 nanoseconds, A gets changed back to 1. So at 0.8, instantaneously, I change A from 0 to 1. B stays the same. Instantaneously, that NAND gate goes from 1 back to 0 because I now took and re-added that leg to it. But my output still stays at 1, right? Because it's going to take 0.5 nanoseconds, or 0.8 plus 0.5 equals 0.8 plus 0.5 equals 1.3 nanoseconds later. 1.3 nanoseconds later, oh boy, so A is still 1, B is still 1, instantaneous is still 0, and finally F itself changes. Okay? Not hard stuff, people. I didn't introduce any tricks here. I'm just forcing us to look at the details as a function of time and as F instantaneous and F out. In addition to the NAND gate itself, I'm also concerned about this delay because we're going to look at this when we start talking about more complex circuits where other components are creating that delay for us. All we want to do here is just sum it up for you so you can see that, yeah, even though my gate instantaneously responded, it has to go through this additional delay before it actually changes its output. Does that make sense now? See what we're getting at? Does this seem too trivial? Okay. I'll go with it. All right, so there's ways we can then model these delays, these gate delays themselves, without having to have this phony delay 0.5 nanosecond thing here, because that symbol doesn't really exist like that. Actually, it means something else. Similar but different. Okay, so instead what we can do is we can say, this gate takes 0.2, whatever my time unit is, 0.2 of my unit time delay. 0.4 unit times net propagation delay, 0.5 units of time propagation delay. Okay, so I can write those as a function of the component themselves, so I can then calculate the different delays. So the thing we're trying to get to here is we said we're going to simulate this, right? Because we want to design these combinations, these sequential circuits, and we need to consider the propagation delays. Okay. So we are concerned with these timing delays, just like you have on the bottom, that bottom chart on your simulation tool, right? You've got this time sequence graph going on there, which is giving you a bunch of information that you're probably not paying too close attention to right now. But this is why it's important, is because we do have these propagation delays built inside of our sequential circuits themselves. And if we're not taking those into account, we could generate an incorrect answer. All right, so consider in this case here, I want to set up a 2-input multiplexer, which does exactly this. I've got y equals a for s equals 0, y equals b for s equals 1. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? I've got a and b, I've got s sitting in here. What does s stand for?
Sign?
Set, right? Remember our SR latch? What was the R?
Reset.
Reset. Set and reset. Okay, so I've got A and B in a set. Now look and see what's going on here. I've got 2 AND gates and an OR gate. So the OR gate says if I have A in its second leg, or I have B in its second leg, then I'm going to fire it to 1, right? And I've got this delay here. Now, interestingly enough, I've set this up so that the B gate has less delay than the A gate does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also just the opposite value for the set bit. So what that's really saying is that I can use the set bit to choose either A or B, right? Because those are AND gates. So if I choose A, which really means I need to have a 0 for set, right? Because 0 will go through that inverter, get set to 1, and then based upon whatever the input value of 1, it will then change, right? And if it's 0 there, it's 0 going into the B's AND gate, which means we're always going to ignore B, right? B can do whatever it wants to do, we're not going to change, right? So I'm going to use my S bit here to select one or the other. But notice I've got that little delay function going on. So I could have a moment in time when I have both A and B. How much moment of time?
0.2 seconds.
Is that
0.2 seconds?
0.2 units of time? I would say, if I don't know what my units of time are, then I would say 0.2 units of time. Maybe nanoseconds, microseconds, milliseconds, seconds, I don't know what they are. So I have 0.2 units of time. Okay, so I could have that case happen here. And that's what we're diagramming here with these circuits and their inputs given time, right? So I care about S, I care about S naught. Notice that there's always a delay between S and S naught, representing that 2 units of time inverter sitting there. And it's during that period of time, it doesn't show it there, but it does show it here, or it would show it here, right? So it shows it here between that unit of time when A was set and B was set, that I would have them both set. Now, it wouldn't change the value of Y. What it's saying is that it takes this circuit 0.2 units of time delay to determine whether A or B was the correct output. Right? Because that is this here is the one case where I've got the delay where I can have them both be true and the output of Y isn't going to be able to be differentiated by A or B. Make sense?
Yes.
You think so? Yeah, it's straightforward. It's straightforward stuff. But this is how you use these graphs to help you understand what's going on with the circuit so that we can start thinking in terms of, oh, so when I'm designing this circuit, okay, in this case here, it's just a delay model, input select delay model. If I have an input select delay model that I'm simulating and I'm going to build, I'm going to set it up so it has a 2.2 unit of time differential. I design that into that circuit. I set it to 0.2 and off we go. And I take that into consideration when I'm designing the circuit. So that works? Okay. So 2 things are happening. I'm getting lots of droopy heads, and I'm getting people exiting the classroom. So I guess I will, right? We'll see on next Wednesday. See you on Wednesday.